Colonel James Carter stands on the porch of his newly purchased home, breathing in the crisp morning air. After 20 years of service, 3 tours overseas, and countless nights in war zones, retirement finally feels real. His home in Crestwood Estates is a symbol of everything he fought for, a quiet, safe community where he and his wife, Angela, can finally relax. He watches Angela set up their patio furniture, her laughter light as she arranges cushions. "Feels like home already, doesn't it?" she says. James nods, but a prickle of unease tickles his gut. Something's off. It's not the neighborhood itself. Crestwood is picturesque, the kind of place where every lawn is trimmed to perfection, and every driveway boasts luxury cars. No, it's the way people watch him. Since moving in last week, he's noticed it. Long stares from neighbors who quickly look away. Tight smiles that don't quite reach their eyes. And then there's her. Across the street, a woman in a crisp white blouse and beige slacks stands with her arms crossed, her lips pursed so tight they might disappear. Her blonde bob doesn't move in the breeze, stiff with enough hairspray to withstand a hurricane. James meets her gaze, offering a polite nod. She doesn't return it. Instead, she pulls out her phone and starts typing furiously. "Angela," he mutters, stepping closer to his wife. "Who's that?" Angela glances up and follows his gaze. "Oh, that's Karen, I mean Mrs. Whitmore." She smirks. "HOA president. She already came by while you were at the store. Told me we need to submit an official request before changing our porch light." James frowns. "Seriously?"
"Yeah.
And she didn't seem too thrilled when I told her we were adding a basketball hoop for the kids when they visit." His jaw tightens. He's dealt with his fair share of entitled people, but something tells him Mrs. Whitmore isn't just about rules. A car pulls into the driveway next door, and a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair steps out. "Hey, neighbor," he calls, waving. "Welcome to Crestwood. I'm Tom." James shakes his hand. "James Carter. Good to meet you." Tom leans in, lowering his voice. "Listen, a little heads up. The HOA's picky, but Karen? She's intense. Got a problem with certain types moving in?" His expression is knowing. James clenches his fists. He's heard this before, seen it in different forms. The subtle, polite racism hidden behind policies and procedures. Across the street, Karen is still on her phone, eyes locked onto him. Something tells him this isn't the last time he'll be dealing with her. The next morning, James wakes to the sound of Angela arguing with someone outside. "You've got to be kidding me." Her voice carries through the open window. James throws on a t-shirt and heads out to find Angela standing toe-to-toe with Karen Whitmore, who holds a clipboard like it's a weapon. Beside her is a wiry man with thick glasses, his HOA badge hanging from a lanyard. "I don't make the rules," Karen says with an exaggerated sigh, though her tight smirk says otherwise. "I enforce them." James steps in. "What's going on?" Karen barely spares him a glance. "You're in violation." "Violation?" James echoes, crossing his arms. "The flag, Mr. Carter." She gestures to the large American flag hanging from a sturdy pole by the front door. HOA guidelines limit flagpole height to 6 feet. Yours is, well, clearly excessive. James stares at her. "That flag is standard issue. I had the same one outside my base in Kandahar. And I read the guidelines. 6 feet is for freestanding poles. Mounted flags don't have height restrictions." Karen's eye twitches. "We reserve the right to enforce the spirit of the rule. If we let everyone start hanging whatever they want." "It's the American flag, Karen." Angela cuts in, arms crossed. "Not a neon beer sign." Karen's lips press together. "Rules are rules." James can see it now. The flag isn't the issue.
He is.
He exhales slowly. "I'll take it up with the board." Karen's smirk returns. "Oh, don't bother. I am the board." Angela scoffs. "You can't just make up rules." Karen holds up her clipboard. "I suggest you comply before we escalate this further. We wouldn't want any unnecessary trouble. Now would we?" James' jaw tightens. He's dealt with real threats before. IEDs on the roadside, snipers in the hills. Karen Whitmore isn't dangerous, but she is the kind of person who uses bureaucracy like a weapon. As she turns to leave, Tom from next door steps onto his porch, watching with a wary expression. James catches his eye, and Tom shakes his head slightly, mouthing, "Watch your back." That prickle of unease returns. Later that evening, James takes a slow walk around the neighborhood. A few neighbors wave, but others glance at him, then quickly look away. His instincts scream at him. Something isn't right. By the time he gets back, Angela is waiting with her phone in hand. "Babe, I just checked the HOA records." She looks up, face tight. "Guess how many complaints have been filed about our house?" James exhales. "How many?" Angela turns the screen. 12. Noise violations. Improper parking. Unauthorized lawn decorations. All filed in the last 2 days. James looks up, and through the window, he sees Karen standing across the street again, smiling. She's not just trying to enforce rules.
She's trying to force them out.
James doesn't back down. That's never been his way. The next morning, he walks straight to Karen's house. She's outside pruning her roses, her perfectly manicured lawn looking like something out of a magazine. She barely acknowledges him as he approaches. "Karen," James says, voice steady. "We need to talk." She sighs dramatically and turns, eyes filled with exaggerated patience. "Mr. Carter, I really don't have time for this." "Make time," he says. "These HOA complaints? The flag issue? The parking violations? We both know this isn't about rules." Karen tilts her head, feigning innocence. "I have no idea what you mean." James steps closer, lowering his voice. "Cut the act. You don't want us here." Karen's smile tightens. "Oh, James. May I call you James?" She doesn't wait for an answer. "You have to understand. Crestwood has standards. People move here for a certain atmosphere, order, decorum, people who respect the community's values. Surely, a military man like yourself understands rules." His fists clench, but he keeps his tone level. "Rules are meant to be fair. This isn't fair." Karen laughs, an airy, condescending sound. "Life isn't fair, Colonel." She gestures to her clipboard. "And unless you want to spend your golden years buried in fines and hearings, I suggest you start thinking about whether this is the right neighborhood for you." James takes a slow breath. "We're not going anywhere." Karen leans in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We'll see about that." Pushing back. James isn't naive. He's fought too many battles to expect a fair fight. So he does what he does best. He gathers intel. That night, he and Angela start digging. They comb through HOA records, noting a pattern. Every family of color that moved into Crestwood over the past 5 years mysteriously sold their homes within a year. Some were buried under fines. Others had security issues, vandalism, break-ins that never seemed to get investigated. And every single case had one common denominator: Karen Whitmore. Angela exhales sharply. She's been running people out of here for years. James nods grimly. And no one stopped her. He starts talking to neighbors, especially the ones who seem hesitant, the ones who give him wary glances, but aren't outright hostile. He finds his first ally in Tom. "She's a snake," Tom mutters over a beer on James' porch. "She bullied the Martinez family into selling last year. Kept hitting them with unapproved paint colors and yard violations until they gave up. I thought about saying something, but HOA elections are a joke. She's got the board under her thumb." James exhales. Not for long. Things get worse. The next morning, James wakes up to find his tires slashed. Angela's hand tightens around his arm. "She wouldn't. She didn't have to," James mutters. "She's making it clear that we aren't welcome." They call the police, but when the officer arrives, he barely glances at the damage before shrugging. "Could be random vandalism. Nothing we can do without proof." Karen watches from her porch, sipping her coffee with a smug expression. Angela grips James' arm. "Babe, she's escalating." James nods. He's done playing nice. That night, he installs security cameras front door, driveway, backyard. If Karen or anyone she's working with tries something again, he'll have the proof. And then, just as expected, she makes her next move. A week later, James gets a letter from the HOA. A final warning. Failure to comply with HOA standards will result in legal action and potential foreclosure. Angela gapes at the letter. She's actually trying to take our house? James folds the letter carefully, jaw tightening. She thinks she can push us out the way she did everyone else. Angela's voice shakes with fury. So, what do we do? James looks up, calm and steady. We go to war. The HOA emergency meeting is held in Crestwood's pristine clubhouse, an extravagant space with polished wood floors and a chandelier that screams old money. Every seat is filled, the room buzzing with tension. James and Angela sit near the front, side by side, as Karen Whitmore stands at the podium, clipboard in hand, smiling like a queen addressing her subjects. Thank you all for coming, she begins, her voice sickly sweet. Tonight, we address the unfortunate violations that have disrupted our beloved community. She scans the crowd dramatically before landing on James. Mr. Carter, you have repeatedly disregarded HOA policies, unauthorized flags, excessive lawn decorations, disturbances reported by neighbors. A murmur spreads through the room. James doesn't react, keeping his expression neutral. Karen sighs in mock disappointment. Despite multiple warnings, you've shown blatant disregard for our rules and values. She straightens her blouse. The HOA has decided to take legal action for noncompliance. If you refuse to abide by our regulations, we will begin foreclosure proceedings. Angela grips James' hand under the table. A few gasps ripple through the room. Karen folds her arms, her smirk widening. Perhaps Crestwood isn't the right fit for you. James finally stands, his presence commanding. The room quiets as he calmly walks to the front. That's interesting, Mrs. Whitmore, he says evenly. Because I did some digging. Karen's smirk falters. Excuse me? James pulls out a thick folder. I looked into past HOA complaints. And guess what I found? Every non-white family that moved into Crestwood was suddenly drowning in violations. Coincidence? Karen scoffs, but a few people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. James flips to another page. Here's a record of who filed those complaints. He holds it up. Turns out, most of them trace back to you. Karen's expression hardens. That's preposterous. James nods. That's what I thought. Until I checked public records. He pulls out another sheet. HOA fines you issued against minority families? Not one had a legitimate legal basis. You've been fabricating violations to force people out. The room is dead silent. Even Karen's usual supporters look uneasy. Karen recovers quickly, forcing a laugh. This is absurd. You're a former soldier, not a lawyer. You don't have the authority to question my leadership. James smiles coldly. You're right, but the Pentagon does. Karen blinks. What? James pulls out his phone and hits play. A voice fills the room, calm, authoritative. This is General David Reynolds of the United States Army. Colonel Carter briefed me on Crestwood's HOA practices. If any further retaliatory actions occur against him or his family, I will personally ensure federal intervention. Karen's face drains of color. James tilts his head. Funny thing about harassing a retired U.S. Army colonel, I still have friends in high places. Karen stumbles back. You called the Pentagon? James shrugs. I didn't. They called me. The room erupts. Some residents whisper. Others openly glare at Karen. Tom lets out a low whistle. Karen shakes her head, her voice rising. This is nonsense. You people are turning on me over some conspiracy? James holds up one last document. Oh, and by the way, fraudulent HOA fines? Illegal. Every homeowner you targeted now has grounds to sue. Karen stares at the paper, her hands shaking. James leans in, voice low. Checkmate. For the first time since James met her, Karen Whitmore looks afraid. The confident smirk is gone, her hands gripping the edges of the podium as if it's the only thing keeping her upright. The entire room watches, the weight of her lies pressing down like a collapsing roof. I won't stand here and be attacked like this. Karen snaps, regaining some of her composure. This is slander. I've only ever acted in the best interest of this community. James tilts his head. Is that right? He taps his phone screen, and another recording plays. HOA will fine them until they leave. If they don't want to follow our standards, they don't belong here. Karen's own voice echoes through the room. She freezes. Gasps ripple through the crowd. James watches her carefully. That was from your phone call last week. You were careless. Didn't think anyone was listening. Karen stammers, looking wildly around. That's not me. You doctored that recording. Tom clears his throat and steps forward. Actually, Karen, that's from my doorbell camera. He pulls out his phone. It recorded you standing on my porch, running your mouth about fixing the problem with the Carters. Karen spins toward him, her face red. You traitor. Tom shrugs. I just got sick of your crap. Karen's hands shake as she turns back to the room. You can't seriously believe them. I have worked tirelessly for this community. Everything I do is for the good of Crestwood. James crosses his arms.
Funny.
Because fraud, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds are all crimes. And I'm guessing the police will find plenty more once they start looking into your accounts. Karen's lips part, eyes darting toward the back of the room where two uniformed police officers now stand. One of them, a stern-looking black woman, steps forward, holding a folder. Karen Whitmore, the officer says, voice clipped. Karen stiffens. Why, yes. The officer pulls out a document. You're under investigation for fraudulent financial practices, discriminatory misconduct, and extortion through HOA fines. We have reason to believe you've been illegally misusing funds and harassing minority homeowners. A murmur spreads through the crowd. Karen's mouth opens and closes like a fish gasping for air. You can't just come in here and... We can and we are. The officer cuts her off. We've already subpoenaed HOA financial records. She glances at James. Your evidence was very helpful, Colonel. Karen lunges toward the podium, her face contorted in rage. This is a lie. This is a setup. No one moves to defend her. Instead, one of the HOA board members, an older man who's remained quiet until now, slowly stands. I had no idea she was doing all this, he mutters, his face pale. She said the fines were legitimate. She promised the money was being used for community improvements. The officer narrows her eyes. Actually, the records show tens of thousands of dollars mysteriously vanishing under her control. She looks at Karen. Care to explain? Karen snaps. You people are ruining this neighborhood, she shrieks, voice shrill. I kept this place safe. I kept it clean. Now you're just letting anyone move in. Dead silence. Karen's mask is gone. The polite, rule-enforcing neighbor has crumbled into an unhinged woman ranting about who belongs where. It's over. The officer nods to her partner. Take her in. Karen screams as the handcuffs click around her wrists. You can't do this. I built this community. I am Crestwood. The officer smirks. Not anymore. They lead her toward the door. Karen thrashes, eyes landing on James one last time. This is your fault, she spits. You did this to me. James meets her gaze, his voice calm. No, Karen. You did this to yourself. As the door shut behind her, a heavy silence lingers. Then someone claps. Then another. Soon, the entire room erupts in applause. Karen Whitmore's downfall spreads like wildfire. By the next morning, local news stations are running the story. HOA president arrested for fraud and discrimination, flashes across TV screens, and social media erupts with outrage. Residents of Crestwood, once silent bystanders, suddenly find their voices. I always suspected something was off, one woman tells a reporter. I should have spoken up sooner. Karen fined me for having a single flower pot on my porch, another resident admits. Meanwhile, her friends got away with anything. Within days, the HOA board dissolves under pressure. New leadership takes over, residents who believe in fairness, not control. The fraudulent fines Karen imposed?
Void.
The money she stole?
Seized.
James and Angela watch it all unfold from their front porch, coffee cups in hand. She's facing years in prison, Angela murmurs, scrolling through an article.
Fraud.
Embezzlement. Civil lawsuits from nearly a dozen families. She shakes her head. She's ruined. James exhales, staring at the street. It looks different now. Lighter. Like a weight has lifted. You think things will really change? Angela asks softly. James takes her hand, squeezing gently. They already have. The community reckons with itself. At the next neighborhood meeting, people are different. They listen more. They question things instead of blindly following. Tom stands up and clears his throat. I let Karen get away with too much. I thought, hey, not my problem. But it was my problem. And I won't be silent again. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the crowd. An elderly black couple, who had almost sold their home after months of harassment, receive a formal apology from the HOA. Other minority families step forward, finally feeling seen. One by one, the walls Karen built begin to crumble. A final visit. A week later, James gets an unexpected letter. It's from Karen. The envelope is crumpled, the handwriting shaky. Inside is a single note. You destroyed my life. James stares at it for a moment, then calmly folds it and tosses it into the trash. Karen had spent years trying to drive him out. Now, she was the one who no longer belonged. The true victory. That evening, James and Angela raise their flag again. It flutters proudly in the breeze, untouched. No complaints.
No threats.
Just peace. James watches it for a long time, a small smile tugging at his lips. Because in the end, he didn't just fight for his home. He fought for the right to exist, without fear, without apology. And that was the sweetest victory of all.